Today marks World Water Day. Over 2 billion people globally are living without access to safe water. As water scarce, should I say, as South Africa is a water-scarce country, it's not immune to a problem, or should I say, the issues around the provision of water. Now, earlier, the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Senzo Mchunu, confirming that South Africa is the 30th driest country in the world. Let's get more on this now from Professor Mike Muller from the University of Wits University. Prof, thank you very much for your time. Let's start with the status of clean water provision in the country. Where are we based on your assessment?
Morning, Colin, and to your viewers. I think it's a good place to start, because what people worry about, particularly in these days when we're not sure whether the electricity is still going to come out of the socket, we want to know whether water is going to come out of the tap. And it's a mixed picture. If you're living in the city, Johannesburg is doing reasonably well, Cape Town doing reasonably well. You move to Ekurhuleni and Tshwane, you begin to hear about problems. But the majority of people actually have piped water. It's usually providing water. It's usually of good quality. And, in the cities, we're not doing too badly. The further you get from the cities, the more one needs to worry. We know that there's probably 6 million people who still don't have a formal safe water supply, usually mainly in the rural areas, some in informal settlements. But that's 6 million people. There's probably at least that number again who have a tap, who have pipes, but when they go out in the morning and they open the tap, there's no water in it. So I think one of our big problems, first we have to solve the problem of people who don't have any infrastructure to bring them safe water, but then we've got to make sure that once the infrastructure is put in place, it keeps working. And what we're seeing in many parts of the country, particularly the smaller towns and rural areas, lots of infrastructure being built, but lots of it isn't working. And that's probably the most serious problem facing the people at the moment.
I'm glad you touch on infrastructure, Prof. As we mentioned in that intro, and of course this being mentioned by the Minister of Water and Sanitation a little earlier, we are the 30th driest country in the world. On top of that, there's a warning from the minister based on research that they have that's available, or should I say data, and that is to say, in the year 2035, there is likely to be increased competition. I think it's year 2025 or 35, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but there is likely to be this increased competition for access to clean water. Let's talk planning, Professor. The minister spoke about a 15 to 20-year horizon. How well are we doing in terms of planning adequately?
I think it's very important, and that's one of our difficulties. It's one of the reasons we have to have these water days every year, to remind people about water, that it's quite a complicated business and we have to look very long into the future to get it right. So, Goli, I think one of the things that we tend to forget is that our population has grown quite dramatically from 1994 to now. In 1994, there were 36 million people who needed water. Today, there's probably more than 60 million. Now, that means that what we're doing, it's not that the water's running out, it's that there's more people needing water. And we have to plan to make sure that there is going to be enough water available in 2025, 2030. We plan to different horizons in the business. I know a lot of the cities are planning now till 2040. But the question is, do we just keep providing more and more water, or do we try also at the same time to use the water better, more carefully, not using as much per person, because then we don't need to build so much infrastructure, we don't need to spend so much money building new things, we can concentrate on making them work better. And that's the balance that we always have to make. either building new or using what we've got better, and usually it's a mixture of both. But we do know that, for instance, for the Gauteng region, we've got to get this Potihadi Dam in Lesotho built by 2028, or Gauteng is going to be at risk. Mkomazi Dam for the eThekwini and Sunduzi areas is another big issue. But while we wait for those to be built, let's use the water that we've got carefully and see how far we can stretch it. We don't want to get into a Cape Town situation where they put off building the dam a bit too long, and then they had a bad drought, and they didn't hit day zero, but they came close to really having heavy restrictions. And that's the kind of thing we're trying to avoid.
The Lesotho Water Highlands project, Prof, that's one project that I think is uppermost in government's mind. You mentioned the year 2028. Do you think we're going to meet that deadline?
Well, at the moment, things are working well. We know that contractors have been invited to tender for that work. These are huge projects. This is going to be one of the highest dams in Africa. We're going to build a sort of 35-kilometer tunnel, which you could drive a double-decker bus down. That's the kind of thing we need to do. If the contracts come in acceptable, the offers, if the awards are made, and if the contracts are built correctly, we can make it. At least everything is on track. Some of the other issues, though, we do still have a problem. For instance, the Mkomazi Dam, which was going to reinforce the whole of the south coast of KZN as well as the cities of Msunduzi and Tekwini, that got stopped for environmental reasons. They had to go back to the start. That's now quite delayed. And, part of our difficulty in this water sector, we have to keep saying things like, well, in Msunduzi and Tekwini, it's this issue. In Polokwane, it's the other. In Kadeha, it's another. And it really is a matter where the municipalities and the citizens in each place need to know what's their water problem, what should we be doing now, is it going to be good enough in 10 years' time, and what can we do in the meantime to improve what we're doing with our water. So always, what are we doing with our water today, and what's going to happen tomorrow in 10 years' time that we need to start preparing for today.
Nearly 600 cases, Professor, are being investigated dating back to 2014. This relates to those who pollute our water and river streams. How well is government doing on the score of penalties against those who pollute these water catchment areas? Because he says compliance, monitoring and enforcement is now the name of the game.
Yeah, it's a very important question. And, the awkward answer here, of course, is that one of the worst sets of polluters, sure, some of the mines are not doing their bits, although the bigger companies do try very hard because everyone's looking at them. But if we were to ask, what is the biggest cause of pollution in the country, a lot of people would say it's actually municipalities not running their wastewater treatment plants properly. And, the difficulty with that is if you then go and sort of point fingers at the private sector and they just turn around and say, well, you don't manage to do it yourselves, you get into a silly argument. Both municipalities and private business ought to fix their water treatment and make sure they don't pollute the rivers. At the moment, we don't have critical cases where the pollution is actually stopping people from drinking the water. What it does do is it makes it more difficult and more expensive to treat it to make sure that it's safe. And, do we want to pay as water users money that could be saved if we just cleaned it up at source? I think we all agree we should clean it up at the source, and then it would be easier and cheaper to bring safe, pure water to everybody's household. But pollution is something that we have to keep our eye on, but that includes the municipalities. It's not just the industries and the mines that are the culprits.
Well, you've just prompted another question now, Professor. When you speak about companies and, companies versus government on this issue of pollution, do you think that the government, in a way, is forced to be lenient because there is this fine balance between keeping businesses running and penalizing them to a point where they are unable to continue doing business?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we have many businesses that would stop, if they had to clean up their water. So one of our problems also, if we look at the mining sector, which is probably responsible for most of the pollution from the private sector, from the industry side, I think one of the things that we've done for good reasons is we've encouraged lots of smaller companies to go into the mining business. And the trouble is, if you're a small company in the mining business, you're trying to make enough money to pay the wages and the diesel bill at the end of the month. Exactly. And if you have a wastewater treatment plant, or if you're supposed to build a little dam to catch the wastewater and make sure it doesn't run into the river, it's very easy to save money on that. And that's where you start getting problems. What we haven't been very good at, I think, is trying to ensure that we actually get mining development happening in a way which doesn't threaten our water resources. So we've got lots of coal in the very dry Waterberg areas out in the western, northwest province and the west side of Limpopo province, but there's not much small mining going on there. If you come across to Mpumalanga, you've got all these little coal mines that are being built. You see them if you drive down to Mbombela. And you can see that they don't have very much management. They dig up an awful lot of ground. It rains on that. That wastewater washes off and washes into the rivers. And you wonder why we're putting our coal mining businesses into the most vulnerable areas, because that's where our Vaal River starts from. That's a lot of the Limpopo River, the Komati River. And even down in KwaZulu-Natal, they have this problem of little coal mines being started here and there, scattered around. And those create very sort of local problems, but if you've got enough of those local problems, they create a big problem. And I think that's one of the areas where we really need the environmentalists to stop shouting about little problems, a problem here and a problem there, and actually say to government, why don't we actually have a proper environmentally managed coal program? We're going to be mining coal for 20 or 30 years. Let's mine it properly and not damage the landscape that we have and spend the next 30 years cleaning up after ourselves. But it's a long and complicated problem, and this is, as always, the problem with water is we can pick up a particular issue and then we can go on talking about it for days and days and months and years and still not do anything, which is why we had that incident down on the Loskop region where a coal mine's wastewater dam burst and killed a whole lot of fish down that river. And you think, why did we need to do this? Yeah. And answer is, we are not actually trying to manage that coal resource as a national resource. We're letting lots and lots of little operators get busy there, and it's very difficult to control once that starts.
Professor Mike Muller, thank you very much for your insights on this matter. A water expert with the Wits University.